Kia ora koutou katoa, ko John Campbell aho, haere mai, welcome to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Tau te maira I hoa mā, he kōrero kei te haere, he kaupapa kei te karawhiua. Tonight on Checkpoint, a Black Power member for life, but also by the accounts of everyone from Kaumātua to the Māori Party to a former cop who's now a national MP, a man doing valuable work with youth in jail. Should he be able to? Can gang members do good? Why was a housing crisis in 2007, then not one now, according to the same man, John Key? Dinosaurs in Tūhoe country and how the iwi and paleontologists are hunting them together, Hillary Clinton's emails, and the BBC's Jeremy Bowen from Baghdad. Plus Steve Hansen, is he staying on to the Rugby World Cup in 2019? But before all of that, Katrina Batten with RNZ News.
Kia ora, good afternoon. A couple were paid over $1,000 to care for 3-year-old Moko Rangi Tohereri and his sister, but instead they subjected the boy to months of abuse and eventually killed him. The Rotorua High Court has released documents from the court file to RNZ in the case of Tanya Shaler and David William Hairewa. Edward Gay reports.
The pair were sentenced last month to 17 years in prison with a minimum non-parole period of 9 years for killing 3-year-old Moko Rangi Tohereri. The charges had been downgraded from murder to manslaughter. The court documents show that decision went all the way to the Deputy Solicitor General. Also, the pair have extensive criminal records. Hairewa has 109 convictions, including aggravated robbery and male assaults female. Justice Cates concluded at sentencing that the convictions were either too historic or not relevant for sentencing. Ko Edward Gay tēnei.
A South Taranaki iwi is demanding that the Department of Corrections head Ray Smith resign over the removal of a Black Power member from his role as kai whakamana for prisons. Ngā Pari Nui was stood down yesterday after his gang affiliations were pointed out to the Corrections Minister Judith Collins. The Corrections National Commissioner Jeremy Lightfoot met with Mr Nui and Ngāti Ruanui in Hāwara today. Kaiara Taki for the iwi, Debbie Ngarewa Packer, says it's shameful Mr Smith didn't come himself. She says he needs to take responsibility for the way in which Mr Nui was removed, given that he made the appointment. The iwi wants an independent review of Mr Nui's removal and an apology from the minister. Emergency services are still searching an Auckland property for a bomb. They say residents should be able to return home soon. Police were called to a home on Henwood Road in Mangere this morning. A 200-metre cordon was enforced around the property after police were told by mental health professionals that a man had homemade explosives. Both residents and the nearby Kingsford Primary School were evacuated. The armed offenders and bomb squad were also at the scene. A robot has been used to examine the property for any explosives. Inspector Kerry Watson said a 20-year-old man was arrested without incident at a business address in Papakura at 2 p.m. He says the man is now getting the health care he needs. Fog has caused havoc with flight schedules at Auckland Airport. About 70 domestic arrivals and 72 departures have been cancelled. Jetstar says 650 of its passengers are grounded by fog at Auckland Airport. A spokesperson, Phil Boyan, says it's likely that the earliest flights available will be tomorrow. 3 international flights have been diverted to Wellington and another 2 to Christchurch. Air New Zealand says it's still trying to find out how many of its passengers are affected by the delayed and cancelled flights. Another 8 domestic arrivals and 1 domestic departure have been delayed due to the fog. Labour and the Greens are launching their own inquiry into homelessness after National Party MPs voted against a Select Committee investigation. The two parties say they pitched the idea of a Select Committee inquiry because they thought it was time to try to find some cross-party consensus on how homelessness can be ended. The Prime Minister, John Key, says his party discussed the matter at its caucus meeting on Tuesday and decided not to support it.
And the reason why we didn't adopt the Select Committee taking that view was because we've already done a lot of work in that area. Paula Bennett did that well over a year ago. We've actually got quite a strong plan for dealing with the homelessness issue.
The Prime Minister, John Key. The Labour Greens inquiry will include hearings in main centres and will also call for submissions, including from the public. Auckland councillors have parked up a report on the future of the city's port, leaving it until after October's election. The councillors and 2 members of the city's independent Māori statutory board have simply received the recommendations of a study group that long term the port should move away from the downtown area. The study proposes either the Manukau Harbour or the Firth of Thames as the most likely alternatives, although both have significant hurdles to overcome. The Council's Development Committee narrowly voted against any work being done before the October elections. In sport, the All Blacks coach Steve Hansen has given his clearest indication yet that he intends to stay in the role through to the 2019 World Cup in Japan. Hansen's contract runs out at the end of 2017, but he says his future will be decided by next month. Asked if he was more likely to stay than go, he told BBC Sport he was sure there would be a positive outcome. Third seed Roger Federer chases an 11th Wimbledon semi-final appearance when he plays Croatian Marin Cilic, while Andy Murray looks to maintain his dominance over Frenchman Jo-Wilfried Tsonga in tonight's semi-finals. Federer has beaten Cilic in 5 of their 6 encounters, while Murray's beaten Tsonga in 12 of their 14 matches. A win over Cilic would ensure Federer equals Jimmy Connors' record of 11 Wimbledon semi-final appearances and draws level with Connors on a record 84 wins at Wimbledon. The New Zealand men's basketball team begin their last chance bid to qualify for next month's Rio Olympics overnight. The Tall Blacks' opening game of the qualification tournament is against hosts Philippines and will be played in front of a sold-out crowd of 16,000. The Tall Blacks coach Paul Henare says the New Zealanders' mental fortitude will be tested by the vocal and parochial crowd in basketball-crazy Manila.
A lot of it's going to be mental. There are going to be a lot of distractions in terms of atmosphere, what's on the line, and what we've sort of come here to do. But I believe the work that we've put on over the last 3.5 to 4 weeks or whatever it's been will put us in good stead.
Tall Blacks coach Paul Henare. That's the news.
Tonight on Night's Extreme Dermatology with Sandra Lee, aka Dr. Pimple Popper. Her blackhead busting videos are essential viewing for millions. We present a brief history of the jazz of the 1980s, performed by some of Wellington's finest, and Motoko Kakubayashi reports from Japan, where 18-year-olds can finally vote, and Barack Obama has just become the first sitting US president to visit Hiroshima. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
I'm so glad it's going to be the last time we hear that promo. Met Service weather to midnight tomorrow. The northern half of the North Island, that's Taranaki and Taupo northwards. Rain developing north of Auckland overnight and spreading elsewhere tomorrow with strengthening northeasterly winds. Some heavy falls about Northland from afternoon and about Auckland, Coromandel and Western Bay of Plenty later. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, patchy drizzle developing tomorrow, then turning to rain at night. Whanganui and Taihape to Wellington, also Wairarapa, fine and cloudy periods, scattered rain north of Levin late tomorrow. Nelson, Bulla and Westland mainly fine, but rain in Nelson late tomorrow. Bulla, Marlborough and Canterbury, mostly cloudy tomorrow with patchy drizzle, especially in the east. Otago and Southland, cloudy periods with the odd shower, fine tomorrow. For Fiordland, rain clearing this evening, fine tomorrow, and the Chatham Islands, a few showers tonight and tomorrow morning. It's 5:08.
Thanks, Katrina. Very busy program tonight. We begin with Ngā Pari Nui and a large meeting in support of him this morning. At that meeting, members of Mr Nui's iwi and local community called on the head of corrections, Ray Smith, to stand down and the Minister, Judith Collins, to apologise. Ngā Pari Nui was volunteering as a kaiwhakamana. According to the corrections website, they're kaumātua given access to prisons to enable the wellness and well-being of their people inside. But he's also a life member of Black Power. And after the Minister, Judith Collins, was alerted to this, he was stood down. Judith Collins is standing by, waiting to talk to us live. But in South Taranaki and Whanganui, they're furious. They say Mr Nui does valuable work with at-risk and criminal youngsters and that he's able to do this because they trust him. And this morning they held a meeting to express their support for him. Hastily convened, it was attended by over 100 people, including many senior kaumātua. And when we heard it was happening, we contacted Ngāti Ruanui by Skype video and got hold of their spokesperson, Debbie Ngarewepaka, who told us what they were discussing in the room behind her.
They've expressed frustration and disappointment. They have talked about the necessity to have control of our own destiny and our own solutions. So there's been quite a lot expressed about the frustrations of someone who has this unique ability to have feet in both camps, and that's now being caused a disadvantage or a conflict. And we also talked about the disappointment that Ray Smith, who signed this off, hasn't done his due diligence or whatever he's saying. And there was unanimous support to ask for him to stand down and for him to be suspended pending a review. If our taonga has to be suspended, so should Ray Smith, who signed it off.
So Ray Smith to stand down as head of corrections, because this has been completely contradictory. Ngāpari has been doing this work for 5 years now with the full knowledge of corrections.
Yep, he's actually been doing it, John, for probably a lot of his older adult life, and he has officially taken the role as kaiwaka mana with Department of Corrections, but he's had involvement with our whānau for a very long time, outside of the period that he's had this formal role.
Suddenly Judith Collins gets involved after sensible sentencing get involved and everything changes. Is that your sense of it there in Hawera?
That's pretty much exactly how everyone sees it, that a bunch of do-gooders and sensible sentencing have used their lobbying position to now affect and tell iwi what to do and tell the treaty partner what to do. And that's where the level of engagement's happening with the Crown and sensible sentencing. And the Minister has been straight out arrogant and refused to meet with the treaty partner and iwi, and certainly the sentiments that we're getting from our iwi chairs across the country are supporting that cause. We see it all the same way.
And who was there from corrections today? Sorry, Debbie. Who was there from? Who came from corrections? Did Jeremy Lightfoot come on behalf of corrections?
Yes, yeah. The National Commissioner, Jeremy Lightfoot, and two of his colleagues who head to Tautoko in their official capacity as well.
Is that him we're seeing there now? Sorry, the camera's just swung round. Is that Jeremy Lightfoot we're seeing there in the suit with the glasses?
Yes, it is.
Debbie, you talk about the work Ngāpari's done. How much work does he do? And we are talking about a man who has the experience of being a troubled youth, working with troubled youth. So how much of his life has he dedicated to this? How much of his time has he given to this?
I would go so far to say all of his life. All of his life has been, and Uncle Sandy, Uncle Mac, Uncle Tony, all these kaumatua, these are whānau that live on the ground, and they've come here because they recognise the years and years of dedication he's done for our whānau that aren't getting support from the government. People are not going into their homes and supporting them. And he's actually tried to make a real impact based on his experience firsthand.
And so, Debbie, forgive me.
So he's dedicated most of his life, certainly as an adult, towards assisting whānau.
And all those people behind you, and the room is emptying out now because the meeting is over, but the room was full. All of those people are there solely to support Ngāpari. There wasn't anything else going on. This meeting was only about him.
The meeting was definitely only about Ngāpari, only about the kaiwaka mana, and you'll see here we have our kohanga, because Ngāpari is also part of the kohanga movement. He's part of Kura Kaupapa. Takite darlings. He's part of our marae trustees. He's part of iwi, hapu, and they've not focused on the overall picture of the man and the contribution that he makes here on the ground. Takite darling, thank you.
Debbie Ngārewa Paka talking to us as that meeting was coming to an end. Listening to that was Corrections Minister Judith Collins, who joins us on the phone now live. Welcome back to Checkpoint, Minister. Nice to have you with us.
Oh, thank you, John. Always nice to be here.
You've got this wrong, haven't you? Because you've used a one-size-fits-all template, and you may have stumbled upon a Black Power member for life who was doing genuinely good and important work.
No, not at all, John. In 2014, the Prime Minister announced this government's gang action plan for the very reason that gangs are a major problem in our prisons and they're a major problem in our communities. And in fact, we need to have principle applied to this, which is why Corrections is undertaking a review. When we have a situation where our prison population, the gang part of it, according to Corrections, has increased from 15% 8 years ago to now close to 30% of our prison population, we have a major problem with recruiting to gangs in our prisons.
Have you any evidence, any anecdotal evidence, any reports, anything at all that say that Ngā Parinui was recruiting?
What I'm telling you, John, is that people are recruiting in our prisons.
Ngā Parinui specifically,
well,
because this is specific to him, this case.
No, it's not at all specific to him.
It's very specific to him because he's the person we're talking about. He is the person who was doing what everyone, including an MP in your own caucus, Chester Burrows, a former policeman in this community, says is good and important work.
No, it's not specific to Mr. Nui, not at all, which is why there is a review of all of the Corrections volunteers. It is really important that Corrections make sure that it is not encouraging, enabling, or in any other way saying that a gang lifestyle or gang membership, a patch on your back, is actually a good thing to aim for.
Look, as for
Mr. Nui and anyone else volunteering in our prisons, there's a very simple solution. Choose the gang or choose the people.
He says, and I've spoken to him today, he says that by being part of the gang, he gets access to the young. Now, look, I agree that there is an issue with gangs. Your statement about the number of gang members in prison is a statement of fact. But what that says, because the rate keeps going up, is that nothing that is being done is working. And here is a man who, on the face of it, according to the Māori Party, according to local MPs, according to Kaumatua, according to everyone who knows him, who we have spoken to, is making a difference.
John, if it was making a difference, we wouldn't, and the work of others involved in this area, then we would not have a doubling of the percentage of prisoners who happen to be
he's one man. That would suggest on the face of it that everything else you're doing is failing, wouldn't it?
No, what it means is that we need to look, Corrections is looking at all of the volunteers working in their prisons. You know, we've got 46% of youth under 19 years in our prisons have gang affiliations. You know, this is a very serious issue, and I think it is really important to keep a principled view of this. And the principle has to be that actually people need to understand that it is not okay to be a member of a gang. I have 50 gangs represented in my prison population that I'm responsible for, 50 of them. What if we had someone who was an important person in a particular community who happened to be a headhunters gang member? What about that? What about other gangs?
Hold on a sec.
No, gangs should not be recognised and be part of how we run prisons, but unfortunately we have to because of the sheer volume.
Don't you cut your garment according to your cloth. What do we know about this man? When did he last commit a criminal offence? Do you know that?
Well, actually, John, I know quite a lot, but I'm not going to go down these details because this matter is now subject to a review.
Is it? No, wait a sec. Has he committed a criminal offence this century?
Actually, John, I'm not going to go down a matter that's subject to review. We now have a gang intelligence centre.
No, absolutely. All of that is true, but the issue isn't going away.
John,
and here is man. Look, I'll tell you what. I spoke to Tariana Turia this afternoon, who knows this man well. She's a local MP and she is highly respected. Former colleague of yours in coalition government, former whānau ora minister. Now, she just sums him up in 1 minute. Have a listen to what she says about him. It takes 1 minute.
He is a wonderful man. He exemplifies what I would call whānau ora in practice. 3 generations of their family live together. He goes house to house in Hāwera, supporting those who most organisations would have trouble accessing. He is just the greatest guy. Absolutely he is.
And yet he is a Black Power member for life, and people are going to look at that and say he is nothing but bad news.
Well, that's sad because I think it's probably at least 25, 30 years since he ever got into any trouble. He is alcohol-free, he is drug-free, he is violence-free. He doesn't do any of that stuff. He is a very good man. And I'm really proud of Ngā Tari. I have seen him in action when we've had serious issues go down here in Whanganui, and he always, always supports everybody who is wanting to do right.
Isn't he, Minister, an illuminating example of how you get back on the rails after you've gone off them?
No, what we're talking about here, John, is that we have a very serious problem with gangs in our prisons. And actually, we need to show some leadership around what people want to do about that. And one of the things I'm saying to you and to the public is that while I'm Minister of Corrections, I will not stand by and say it's okay for someone to choose to be a gang member, a senior gang member, patched member, and to also at the same time have access to young, vulnerable people in our prisons.
Do you have any evidence he was abusing that access whatsoever? Because
John,
I think you are implicitly suggesting that.
John, I am saying very clearly this is subject to a review, which it is being undertaken.
Are there any circumstances in which someone like this can do good? No, Minister, this is a complex issue, and you are right. Gangs are a source of real trouble in this country, but we seem not on the face of it to be addressing it, and your own facts state that explicitly. How do we address it, and are there any circumstances in which somebody who has lived the life is able to be useful in saying to young people, hey, stop drinking, stop taking drugs, stop doing crime, because that is what Ngā Pari Nui has been doing for the past 15 or 20 years.
That's why the Prime Minister announced the Gang Action Plan in 2014. John, if I look at what we're doing in terms of rehabilitation in our prisons, I can tell you the worst performing of all of the rehabilitation is the Tikanga Māori program, where we have a 2.6% increase in reconviction rates of people who go through that program. Every other program, we get a decrease in people being reconvicted. So actually, this particular mentoring program that was set up 5 years ago, that has never even been evaluated as to whether or not it's making a positive difference. So I can't deal in the anecdotal of someone being a lovely human being, because I no doubt there are many people who are lovely human beings, some of whom may be connected to gangs. But I can tell you that the Tikanga Māori program is the worst performing, worse than worst performing, because people are actually getting more reconvictions after completing it. So I think we need to take these, rose-tinted glasses off and say what really is working. Well, it's rehabilitation programs based on drug and alcohol. It's rehabilitation based on drug treatment, on trades training, employment, those sorts of things, the Outer Gate program.
Minister.
But what doesn't work is actually thinking that you just have to have someone go and talk to someone and it's all going to stop. It doesn't. And I think we need to take a principled view, and my view is that this needs to be reviewed.
Judith Collins, Correction Minister, thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening. We appreciate your time. It's 5:23 on Checkpoint. Coming up, the Prime Minister was asked in Parliament why he was talking about a housing crisis back in 2007, and if it was one then, what is it now? We go to an auction to see what can be purchased in Auckland for the average house price of $975,000, and why some Uber drivers are angry at the company for telling them to ignore the regulations for carrying paying passengers. We'd love to hear from you in any way you choose. Text 2101 if you are of the text persuasion. Email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz if you're a fan of email. And don't forget Twitter and Facebook. Court papers released to RNZ News for the first time today have revealed the couple who were jailed for the manslaughter of the toddler who is being called Moko by everyone, Rangi Tohereri, were paid over $1,000 to care for him. Tanya Shaler and David William Hairewa were sentenced to 17 years in prison when they appeared at the Rotorua High Court last month for manslaughter. The papers reveal Moko's mother, Nicola, paid Shaler and Hairewa to look after him. Our Auckland court reporter Edward Gay has been going through the court documents, and he joins me now. Edward, there are details in the court documents that were not discussed at sentencing.
That's right. This money paid by Moko's mother, Nicola Dalipaki, is just one of them. She paid Shaila and Hairewa $1,150 over the months between June and August. And Miss Dalipaki asked Shayla to care for Moko while she supported another of her children in Starship Hospital. And while she was making those payments, we now know that Shayla and Haere beat Moko, leaving him with fatal head injuries, a ruptured intestine and other injuries, including bite marks on his face. And in the last 24 hours of his life, Moko was stomped on and choked. He was so sick he couldn't control his bowels or stand up, and Haere responded by kicking him, rubbing feces in his face and shutting him in a room for hours.
We also now know the pair had previous convictions, right? This is new information, isn't it?
That's right. Shayla has 6 convictions for shoplifting, pretty petty stuff, but Haere has 109 convictions. That's the pair's convictions run to 14 pages. That's them there. Some of those include aggravated robbery, male assaults female, possessing weapons, willful damage, breaching protection orders. We know he was a former Patch gang member, and according to documents filed by Shayla's lawyer, his relationship with Shayla in the past had been violent. The Crown was opposed to the criminal history being released to media. The Crown prosecutor argued it wasn't relevant at sentencing, and even that they shouldn't be released to protect the privacy of Haere and Shayla.
That's quite unusual after sentencing, isn't it, Edward?
Well, it is. Justice Cates concluded that, yes, while she in the end ruled that the previous convictions weren't relevant to the sentencing, she said the media was entitled to test that finding and that the convictions were entered in open court, and that there was strong public interest in this case, and in the interest of open justice they should be released. The Crown also opposed releasing the sentencing submissions. These are the other documents that were released to us, despite the media guidelines for prosecutors put out by by Crown Law in Wellington, saying that sentencing subs can be released. Again, Justice Cates found that strong public interest, fully informed analysis was needed, and those documents should be released.
What else do we know about Shayla's background now?
Well, we know that Shayla's background was violent. Her lawyer, Ron Mansfield, filed written submissions on her behalf, which also detailed Moko's background, saying that Moko came from a violent home, and that he had been violent towards Shayla's children. Mr. Mansfield said that Shayla had depression. There was also evidence of post-traumatic stress disorder. She was smoking cannabis every day. She had serious mental health issues. She also went for help to Child, Youth and Family and the Māori Women's Refuge. According to a mental health report on file, which Mr. Mansfield cites, she basically failed to remember Moko was just a 3-year-old boy, that she was under financial and other stress, and that triggered rage, which triggered this violence. And she's serving her time in the at-risk unit inside prison.
Edward Gay, who's been going through all the documents. Thanks so much, Edward. We appreciate it. It's 28 minutes past 5. The Prime Minister has been asked in Parliament why, as National Party leader in 2007, he was talking about a housing crisis when average Auckland house prices were about half of what they are now. The government has repeatedly refused to describe the current housing situation as a crisis. That's despite the latest figures showing prices around the country rising at their fastest rate in 12 years, and the average Auckland house price nearly $1 million now. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
The latest government housing initiative is a $1 billion infrastructure fund for councils facing high housing demand. The government says it's part of a comprehensive plan to counter the challenge of housing affordability. The Greens co-leader James Shaw asked John Key to respond to a comment he made in his second year as the National Party leader.
Does he agree with the statement made by the leader of the National Party in 2007 that, quote, "We are facing a severe home ownership and affordability crisis," end quote?
Pretty awkward if I don't agree with myself. And, Mr. Speaker, the answer to that question is yes.
because the complete mismanagement of the previous Labor government saw interest rates go to 11%. So, of course, it was having a huge impact on affordability.
Mr Shaw then asked Mr Key to reconcile his past statements with the government's current position.
Can he explain why an average Auckland house price of $493,000 back in 2007 was a severe crisis, but today's average Auckland house price of $975,000 somehow isn't?
If one goes back and has a look over that period of time, for a start off, house prices had nearly doubled under the previous government and interest rates were extremely high.
John Key was then asked about comments made by his Finance Minister, Bill English,
who said just 2 months ago that, quote, very little low-cost housing is being built, end quote.
Firstly, I'd have to look at the context in which the member made the speech. It'll be in relation to, I'm guessing, probably release of some sort of land and the likes, but, Mr Speaker, part of the overall plan is to make sure that there is more affordable housing being built. As we know, actually, the fastest way to ensure that happens is to ensure land prices don't go up at the rate they have been.
Mr Key went on to say the Green Party should put its money where its mouth is.
And if the Greens wanted to support us on RMA reform to allow us to release that land even quicker, we could do that. And so what the member does is parade on TV like he cares about New Zealanders, but he cares so little, he's not prepared to change the law. He can keep smiling, but why doesn't he do something about it?
Supplementary.
Mr Key has also said this week he expects the Reserve Bank to crack down further on investors in the residential market, measures that may well be outlined in a speech by the Reserve Bank Deputy Governor Grant Spencer tomorrow afternoon. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
Meanwhile, yesterday's sales figures from QV revealed the average Auckland house price is nearly $975,000, 46% of the city's sales going to investors. Today we sent our reporter Jessie Chang to Barfoot and Thompson's weekly auction in Auckland CBD to see what was selling for that average house price, $975,000. She didn't have to wait long. Bidding on a 3-bedroom house on a very busy road in Mount Roskill started at $700,000. The house on a Crossley shared 814 square metres of land and has a CV of $580,000.
Calling it once at $985,000. Calling it twice then at $985,000. Third and final time, $985,000. Well, just like Tim, we're a little shy here. And he's just going to have a chat with you. We're not quite at a point we can see it sell, just not quite there.
CV 580. A short time later, after negotiations, the house was sold for $1,001,000. Jessie Chang talked afterwards to Barfoot and Thompson auctioneer Craig McNear about whether home ownership in Auckland is simply becoming unattainable.
You still can get some really affordable properties around the fringes of the city and also in some parts of the inner suburbs. It's just depending on what you are wanting and what you're looking for. Say, for example, in room 2 we had an older inner city apartment sold around the 500s from memory, that kind of thing. So there's definitely affordable properties. It's just what you want to focus on these days, as far as you just got to, some buyers are going to have to adjust what they want to get that affordable property around that new, average sale price or under it. Yeah.
And so do you think buyers now, they're people who are actually wanting to live in the house, or they're investors? Can you get a gauge?
Oh, look, the gauge in my room, I would say there would be a lot of people wanting to be owner-occupiers, from my experience today in the auction room.
And how can you tell that?
Oh, look, just sometimes the comments they make where they, want to move in, or they look at, when I ask them questions, they seem to want to move in. But that's just depending on the property and depending, on the return and that kind of thing. You have some investors as well still quite keen. So probably a mixture.
Craig McNear from Barfoot and Thompson speaking with our reporter Jessie Chang. Coming up on Checkpoint, fog causes havoc, delaying flights at Auckland Airport. Tensions rising as looming labour disputes at our airports threaten widespread disruption to travellers. The FBI recommends US presidential hopeful Hillary Clinton is not charged over her private email account. And 2 New Zealand scientists secure $100,000 in funding to search for dinosaur remains in Te Urewera National Park. This is wonderful stuff. Nona here with news about the pound falling, Asian markets crashing. That's come out. But first, Katrina with the 5:30-ish headlines.
Just say headlines. Moko Rangi Toherere's mother paid a couple more than $1,000 to care for the 3-year-old and his sister. Instead, Tanya Shayla and David William Hairewa subjected the boy to months of abuse and eventually killed him. Last month, they were sentenced to 17 years in prison for manslaughter. The payment is outlined in documents the High Court in Rotorua released to RNZ today from the file. It also contains previous convictions for Hairewa and Shayla covering 14 pages. The Corrections Minister Judith Collins says her decision not to allow gang members to volunteer in prisons has nothing to do with Ngā Parinui. The Whanganui Black Power member was stood down yesterday from his role as kai whakamana for prisons after his gang affiliations were pointed out to the minister. Ms Collins told Checkpoint 30% of people in prison have gang affiliations and people need to know that it's not okay to be part of a gang. Ms Collins says Corrections is holding a nationwide review to make sure no other gang members are working in prisons. Passengers affected by cancelled flights at Auckland Airport due to fog are being told to go home and try their luck tomorrow. About 84 domestic arrivals and 78 departures have been cancelled. 8 domestic departures are delayed and several international flights have been diverted. Labour and the Greens are launching their own inquiry into homelessness after National Party MPs voted against a Select Committee investigation. The two parties say they pitched the idea of a Select Committee inquiry because they thought it was time to try to find some cross-party consensus on how homelessness can be ended. Work on whether to explore a new location for Auckland's port is on hold until after October's election. The Auckland Council's Development Committee has decided by one vote not to do any further work for now on a report recommending a long-term shift to either the Manukau Harbour or Firth of Thames. Those are the headlines. I'll be back at 6 with more news, sport and weather.
Thanks, Katrina. Let's turn to business news now with Nona. I want to discuss the markets, but quickly, Sky Network Television shareholders have approved the merger with Vodafone?
Yeah, 99.6 approved it. What can I say?
What were the 0.4?
99.6. It was like, I don't know, why did they have the meeting? In fact, at the meeting, it was like the shortest meeting ever, less than 20 minutes, 2 questions, very basic, and no discussion. Overdone. Right, so we're just waiting for the Commerce Commission now.
Okay, thanks, Nona. Let's talk about markets because there does seem to be real movements downwards.
It's the British pound that's moving the markets at the moment and in a big way. It's plumbed new depths below 1.3 US.
So this is lowest since Brexit.
Yeah, it's last I looked it was 1.28.
Which is the lowest in 30 plus years.
The lowest, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And so that's really worrying the markets because they've come to the realization that we're living in a low inflation environment, and so there's not a lot of room for central banks to move in any case. There's nothing to stimulate growth, so they're all like, uh-oh, time to sell, panic. So that's what we're seeing. We're seeing a lot of panic in the markets at the moment. Everything was moving around quite a lot, so it was hard to get a real sense of where we were. Before that happened, I talked to a currency dealer, and there's a rumor in the market, which comes back to what we were talking about earlier on house prices in Auckland, this story just before. Look, there's a rumor in the market that the Deputy Governor is giving a speech tomorrow, and he's going to say and or raise the issue about the investor factor and raising these house prices and requiring listen to this, $400,000 down payment on the purchase of a house.
That's by investors, is it?
Yeah, well, possibly. It's only a rumor, so I don't have any details. This is just speculation. But that's moved our dollar around quite a lot. So the New Zealand dollar has, it was like, moving around quite a bit in its own right, never mind the Brexit issue. So, yeah, we've seen some mixed market. So it's really crazy in the markets right now.
Right, give us all the numbers.
Okay, so look, our share market, believe it or not, I don't know how that happened, managed to end up 8 days in a row now. Just a tad, though, just 6 points, edged up to 6,977. So we're very close to that all-time high. You never know. And of course, the New Zealand dollar is mixed. We were down more than half a cent against the US dollar at 71 cents, steady against the Australian at 95.5, and that's because still that uncertainty over the Australian election, that's also looming in this market. And up against the pound at 55 pence. So, and we're seeing that as an upward movement. pretty crazy times.
Crazy times. Nona Peltzer, thanks, Nona. See you tomorrow. Tensions are rising as a looming labour dispute at airports threatens to bring widespread disruption to travellers. In the latest development, the Civil Aviation Authorities threatened to lock out workers who earlier voted to stage 3-hour strikes from the 20th of this month. Eric Frickberg reports.
Around 800 security staff work at airports. They're the ones who screen your bags. At least 500 of them are caught up in the latest dispute, according to one of their unions, Air2. It's accusing the Civil Aviation Authority of trying to erode pay and conditions, saying it's provoked the first planned walkout in 3 decades. A union official, Kelvin Ellis, says many workers are part-timers and they would actually get a pay cut this year, while other people wouldn't see a noticeable pay rise for up to 3 years.
We're determined to resolve this. We're taking this action, our initial action, out of frustration of not being listened to, and the employer has obviously made a conscious decision to escalate the industrial unrest and escalate the disruption.
But the acting chief executive of the Civil Aviation Authority, John Kay, says the pay offer made to staff is a good one, and a similar deal has been accepted by other unions.
We think the offer we have made to date is fair and we think it is reasonable. We're frankly a little unclear what the union is finding difficult. But we are open-minded and we'll go into the compulsory mediation process with a very strong commitment to bring this thing to resolution.
The unions have threatened a series of 3-hour strikes at Auckland and Wellington Airport and bans on overtime and extra hours at Auckland, Wellington and Christchurch. In turn, aviation security has threatened a lockout from normal work sites from the 20th of July. In the meantime, both sides are set for mediation on the 15th of July. If that fails, there could be trouble at many airports, according to the Minister of Transport, Simon Bridges.
This is, if it does happen, going to be happening at the end of a holiday period. There are tens of thousands of people every day that will need to be screened. If that can't be done, if there isn't a continuity of service there, well, ultimately that's pandemonium and we can't have that.
The Air2 union says if the lockout does go ahead, there will be severe disruption of flights at airports and jet aircraft won't be able to take off under international rules. The Civil Aviation Authority says contingency plans are being made with other agencies to do some of the work if the staff aren't there. Even then, it says passengers will face long delays. Simon Bridges is worried about what that might mean for air travel.
In an extreme example, tens of thousands of people would be disrupted and some planes just wouldn't be able to fly. And, I think that would be unacceptable, not just for me as Minister, not just for the Civil Aviation Authority, but for the many thousands of New Zealanders who are trying to get in and around the place.
Simon Bridges didn't say what, if anything, the government would do to make sure airports keep functioning, except to hope that the mediation would be successful. The Prime Minister earlier said that the police might be able to help out in the event of airport disruption. However, the Police Association warned there could be a considerable conflict of interest if police officers cross the picket line to help break the strike, while are also expected to try to maintain order. For Checkpoint, Eric Frickberg.
Uber. Some Uber drivers are angry at the company for telling them to ignore the regulations for carrying paying passengers. Drivers are required by the NZTA to have a passenger endorsement for their licence and a certificate of fitness for their car. But Richard Menzies from Uber told RNZ News, fascinating interview on Morning Report this morning, the company supports drivers who haven't got these requirements to continue operating illegally. Jonah McKenzie has been speaking to Uber drivers.
Well, it was actually my first Uber ride that attracted me to being a driver. It seemed like such an awesome service, and speaking to the driver, it seemed like a job that they were happy with, and that you can pick your own hours.
Ben Wilson is a former software developer who became an Uber driver because it fitted in with his life, studying and looking after children. He's a big fan of the alternative to traditional taxis. But when Uber changed its rules in April, dropping some requirements for drivers and lowering fees, he became concerned, and he's shocked to hear Uber encouraging people to break the law.
I can't believe it, really, that they would be cheeky enough to do that when it's quite obviously and blatantly illegal for all of the drivers that they're telling to do that. NZTA have never been in the slightest bit unequivocal about that. They've always said these are the rules. They said those were the rules when I first inquired myself, and they're still saying it.
Another Auckland Uber driver, Arden McDonald, was also a fan of the Uber model. He's fully licensed and says he can't back the company's current position on licensing requirements.
They want to be the cool kids on the block, and they're saying it's innovative and it's technology and we should all get behind it. There's certain merit to that, but what there isn't merit to is a company acting outside what governs New Zealand, flagrantly disregarding our laws, undercutting all the marketplace at the expense of the individual contractors.
Mr McDonald says he'd like to know why the government's sitting on the fence and not acting.
The government and Simon Bridges needs to actually grow up and do what they're supposed to be doing, which is to enforce these laws. They need to have pressure actually brought on them to comply or cease and desist.
The Minister for Transport, Simon Bridges, says Uber's attitude to New Zealand's regulations is very disappointing.
It's unlawful competition. It's them really trying to compete in a way that they shouldn't be, and that's, as I say, unlawful. But also, I think, just not the Kiwi way. It's not fair play. I think also, the drivers and potential drivers need to think very carefully about this.
Mr Bridges says drivers will face convictions and infringement notices.
Uber isn't saying that they'll stand behind them in terms of the fines. That could be into the tens of thousands of dollars were they to be caught a couple of times. The loss of licence and the convictions that could go with this sort of thing.
But Uber driver Ben Wilson says it's unfair to target the drivers instead of Uber. He's calling on the government to tell the company directly to stop breaking the law rather than picking on the drivers. For Checkpoint, called Joanna Mackenzie Tene.
"14 minutes to 6 on Checkpoint. In a few hours' time, better late than never, the Chilcot report will finally be released. What is it? Well, it's an independent inquiry into the UK's involvement in the invasion of Iraq in 2003. Saddam Hussein fell, a tyranny ended, and chaos, confusion, and terrible disorder arose. Parts of Iraq are now held by Islamic State. Over the weekend, an IS bomb killed over 200 people in Baghdad. That is actually the worst terror event since the 2003 invasion. And everywhere they've been, IS leave death, destruction, and a terrible hopelessness. As the BBC's Jeremy Bowen told me, one of the very few journalists to have been into post-IS Fallujah, it's emptiness and carnage.
Well, John, the thing about Fallujah is it's really close to Baghdad. You can drive there in less than an hour. And so it's remarkable that for more than 2 years, Islamic State were in control there. And before that, the place has been dominated by jihadists, Al-Qaeda earlier, really since the big American battles against them in 2004, 2006. So it's been a hotbed of jihadist activity for a long time, which is why the Iraqi army, when they took it, was so delighted. They said this is a job the Americans couldn't do and that we've done. Fallujah itself is, at the moment, absolutely deserted. It's a city of, I think, about 300,000 people. And apart from fighting men, there are no civilians whatsoever in it.
Yeah, it truly is a ghost town. How did you get there, Jeremy? Because whilst IS have retreated, as the bombing in Baghdad reminds us, even when they're ostensibly gone, they're still able to kill. So how do you get in?
To get into Fallujah at the moment, you have to go through various checkpoints. You can't just roll up there. Iraq is quite a highly regulated country, and you need to get papers and permissions. It's very bureaucratic. We managed to make a connection with one of the elite Iraqi army units. And I managed, thanks to our very good local producer here, I managed to get to talk to a brigadier general. First of all, a full general, then a brigadier general, and he put me in touch with a lieutenant, an intelligence lieutenant that they had, who said, "Sure, I'll come in with you now." So he travelled in with us from, there's a big base, probably about 10 miles outside Fallujah, which the Americans, among others, used to spend, they had a big detachment there. And so he would travel in the front seat of our vehicles, of our lead vehicle, we have two, and would get us through the checkpoints and then showed us round. And we needed that because in that particular situation, we would have been picked up and arrested or stopped from filming. But because I was with a uniformed officer, we were able to do it.
So, Jeremy, IS flee Fallujah and bomb Baghdad, a terrible civilian casualty toll. Is that the payback for Fallujah?
Well, I think that, it was absolutely that. And I think that as they come under more military pressure, they are returning to, their original tactics of urban terrorism, essentially. So they showed very strongly that if the Iraqi government thinks they're beaten, they're very much mistaken. That bomb, even by the grotesque standards of this city, was enormous and killed more than 200 people. And it was really shocking as well for Baghdadis. Even after so many years, people do not get used to mass slaughter.
Jeremy, you used the phrase so many years ago, 2003, of course, the US and British-led invasion overthrew Saddam. And that was the beginning of a kind of vacuum, a power vacuum that has led to this sort of instability and what is effectively in some regions a kind of civil war. And people would recognise you. You're with the BBC, they would watch the BBC, they would recognise you, they would know, of course, their own history. Do they talk to you about this, how this all started?
Yeah, sure they do. I mean, I think people are very wrapped up in the everyday, in the agony of life. But I've been asking that question to a lot of people because the reason I'm here at this particular time is because of Britain publishing the official inquiry, the Chilcot report into what happened in 2003 and afterwards, the run-up to the invasion and what happened during the occupation. So that's been many years in the writing. And so I've asked many Iraqis just what they think about that, and I've only found one person who in fact was that army lieutenant who took us to Fallujah, who said, actually it was worse before in Saddam's days. And bizarrely, even though Saddam was such a brutal, blood-soaked dictator, there is quite a bit of nostalgia here for that era. And I think that's because since the invasion, there's been random killing, the growth of sectarian killing. I think that the jihadist influx into Iraq and the fact that they're still so influential. So all of that has made people, bizarrely, quite nostalgic for the relative order of Saddam's time. They would say, look, people knew where they were. You opposed him, you could end up in jail, you could be tortured, you could be killed. But if you didn't, you could go out in the evening and have a pleasant time with your family without thinking you'd get blown up.
Jeremy Bowen, who is doing stunning work with the BBC in Baghdad. It's 8 minutes to 6 on Checkpoint. We've just got a live shot coming in from Auckland Airport, and you can see, if you're watching, if you can't, that beside the smaller centres, what are called regional flights, there is an awful lot of purple writing the word cancelled. Air New Zealand have just said that because of the fog, in the past few minutes, they've cancelled all regional flights this evening due to fog. So we think, as far as we're the main trunk line is still opening, that Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch line. Now, some of those flights are delayed, but regional flights have been cancelled for the night. It's caused havoc all day, with about 70 domestic arrivals and 72 departures already cancelled. So if you're heading to the airport to fly anywhere other than basically Wellington or Christchurch tonight, do check, but it looks like your flight is not happening for the time being. 2 New Zealand scientists have secured $100,000 in government funding to search for fossil remains in Te Urewera National Park. Remains of carnivorous dinosaurs related to the T-Rex have been found in the area in the past 50 years, including the discovery of a toe bone and a backbone from theropod dinosaurs by amateur paleontologist Joan Whiffen, who's done amazing work. Paleontologist Jane Crampton and GNS scientist John Begg will work with Tuhoi on the project over the 2 years. Earlier I spoke to James Crampton and asked him what they'd found.
We've only scratched the surface, done reconnaissance level work there. We know there's fossils there, all sorts of fossils, of marine shellfish, and we know there are fossil bones of larger animals that lived at the same time as the dinosaurs. But beyond just very low-level reconnaissance work, we really haven't searched. Of course, the Tuhoi people know this land like the back of their hands. But
and the beautiful thing is Tuhoi And, you know, there aren't many iwi in this country more strongly associated with their place than Tūhoe. They came to you, did they? Was this their idea?
Yes, yes. Well, this idea sort of grew out of several years ago. So one of my colleagues, well, the other scientist on this proposal, John Begg at GNS, led a geological mapping program up through Te Urewera and really just putting together the basic geological map of New Zealand. And as part of that work, he had lots of discussions, and I was involved in those with Tūhoe people, and the idea sort of grew out of that, and we thought, well, there's potential here for just complete blue skies discovery, really. We know from the work that the famous amateur paleontologist Joan Whiffen did south of Te Urewera, we know that New Zealand had dinosaurs. We also know that the layer of rock that she was exploring, which she explored a tiny area of, that extends right up through the ranges and gorges of Te Urewera. And so it's this idea to go and explore.
It's so exciting, isn't it? And it's wonderful in science. When you use the phrase blue sky, isn't it exciting that actually this is a journey of discovery, a voyage of discovery for you all?
It is. I mean, it's real frontier paleontology, actually, because it is such forbidding. I mean, it's beautiful country, but it's forbidding to go and explore when you're actually trying to look at the rocks. And I guess I must emphasize that the fossils, there's that whole element of discovery for those, which is wonderful, but the fossils are also just a vehicle to draw people in to this whole, particularly young people, to this whole, the excitement of discovery. And from the fossils you can have conversations about all sorts of things, you know, whether it's climate change or you know, resource exploration or whatever it is, lots of aspects of science. You start that conversation. The fossils are just, in a way, they're just a great hook to get people into those conversations.
Yeah, and I'm hanging on every word, and we all instantly feel like little kids again. Every time dinosaurs are discussed, I'm transformed back to the little plastic ones I had as a 4-year-old and that my children have had. The question, I guess, though, about the fossils is how old are they? How old are the oldest? Do you know yet?
Oh, we've got a reasonable idea. Probably about 85 million years old. So just when I was a child.
Me too. You and me both.
So yeah, they're about 85 million years old. So at that time, New Zealand, the dinosaurs became extinct at 65 million years ago. And at 85 million years ago, New Zealand was a sliver of land that had just broken away from the ancient supercontinent, Gondwana land. So we were physically separated. We were an island in the southwest Pacific, and we just sort of started, we're further south than we are today, and we just sort of started drifting north, you know, under the power of continental drift.
And as we drifted, some of the dinosaurs went along for the ride.
That's exactly right. They were by this stage, by the time these rocks were deposited, those dinosaurs were captive on New Zealand, which was bigger, probably bigger land area than today, but still a relatively small land area compared to the full-size continents.
And so would their extinction have been separate from the wider extinction of dinosaurs? In other words, might they have run out of things to eat earlier and died off sooner?
Oh, no, I don't think so. I mean, it would have still been a rich environment, probably looking not too dissimilar. I mean, there would have been differences in the vegetation, but probably not looking too dissimilar to what Te Urewera looks like today.
Wow.
No, they would have been rich. They did become extinct at the same time as all the other dinosaurs on the planet, you know, when a massive asteroid smacked into Mexico, what is now Mexico.
Yeah, extraordinary. One final question, because funding is precious, and you've just got $100,000 in government funding over 2 years, and that's going to make a real difference to this work, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this sort of work can't go ahead without that sort of funding, which will help support just the field logistics, you know, and moving in and out of the area, and hopefully, if we find exciting things, it'll even help fund, for example, getting medical CT scans of bones in the rock, because actually extracting the bones from the rock is incredibly difficult, and the technology is advancing so fast, for example, that you can now take CT scans and you don't need to take them out of the rock.
Amazing, isn't it, James Crampton? We will update you on what they find. Of course, lots of feedback on Judith Collins. Good on Judith Collins. Make a strong statement that gangs and gang affiliations are not going to be validated and supported by corrections. Imagine the strength of the statement that this apparently pure citizen could make by quitting the gang, says Mac. John says something very similar. If you're keen on this lifelong gang member working in prison, why don't you take him home for the weekend just to see what he's really about? Or is that just too damn risky for you? Be aware, though, that gang members are among the most violent, despicable, untrustworthy bastards you will ever meet. So they're people who agree with Judith Collins. Those who don't say Judith Collins tells us the proportion of the prison population that is gang affiliated has increased over the last 8 years from 15 to 30%. That period is exactly the period that National has been in government, and she has held portfolios in justice, corrections and police. Maybe the question is not whether Ngāpari Nui should be stood down as a kaumātua helping troubled youth. He shouldn't, but rather whether National and Judith Collins in particular should resign because of their complete failure to stop the escalating problem of gang violence. Thank you for all your feedback, whatever side it's coming from. It's wonderful to hear from you. Kia ora everyone, you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Thank you for being with us. Coming up in the next 30 minutes, while Labour and the Greens are holding an inquiry of their own into homelessness, what Auckland Mayor Len Brown regrets about the city's port, and the family of a war veteran that's making a last-ditch attempt for compensation. All of that and more in the next 29.5 minutes, but we begin with RNZ News and Katrina Batten.
Ngā mihi nui, good evening. A couple were paid more than $1,000 to care for 3-year-old Moko Rangi Tohereri and his sister. Instead, Tanya Shayla and David William Haere subjected the boy to months of abuse and eventually killed him. Last month, they were sentenced at the Rotorua High Court to 17 years in prison for manslaughter, and today the court released documents from the file to RNZ. The charges had been downgraded from murder to manslaughter. The court documents show that decision had gone all the way to the Deputy Solicitor General. Also, the pair have extensive criminal records. Hairewa has 109 convictions, including aggravated robbery and male assaults female. Justice Cates concluded at sentencing that the convictions were either too historic or not relevant for sentencing. Passengers affected by cancelled flights at a fog-bound Auckland airport are being told to go home and try their luck tomorrow. Jetstar says 650 of its passengers are grounded by fog and says it's likely the earliest flights will be available in the morning. A total of 161 flights have been cancelled. One passenger told RNZ News that Air New Zealand has announced over the airport's PA system that all its regional flights are cancelled and passengers are advised to go home or make alternative arrangements. The Novotel Airport Hotel says it's now full after stranded passengers snapped up remaining rooms. One stranded passenger says Air New Zealand is putting some passengers on a bus to Taupo. A South Taranaki iwi is calling for the Chief Executive of Corrections to resign over his role in removing a Black Power member from his volunteer position in prisons. Ngāpari Nui was stood down yesterday after his gang affiliations were pointed out to Corrections Minister Judith Collins. Corrections National Commissioner Jeremy Lightfoot met with Mr Nui and Ngāti Ruanui in Hawara today at a hui attended by about 200 people. Speaking from the meeting, the Kai Arataki for the iwi, Debbie Ngarewa Peka, says it's shameful and Mr Smith should also lose his job.
There was unanimous support to ask for him to stand down and for him to be suspended pending a review. If our taonga has to be suspended, so should Ray Smith, who signed it off.
Debbie Ngarewa Peka. The iwi wants independent review of Mr Nui's removal and an apology from the Minister. The Prime Minister has been challenged about why he was willing to talk about a housing crisis back in 2007, but not now when prices are almost double what they were then. The government acknowledges housing affordability is a challenge, but refuses to say it's a crisis. That's despite figures showing prices rising at their fastest rate in 12 years, and the average price in Auckland hitting nearly $1 million. In Parliament, the Greens co-leader James Shaw asked John Key about comments he'd made in his first few years as National Party leader.
Why an average Auckland house price of $493,000 back in 2007 was a severe crisis, but today's average Auckland house price of $975,000 somehow isn't.
If one goes back and has a look over that period of time, house prices had nearly doubled under the previous government and interest rates were extremely high.
John Key responding to a question from James Shaw. A Wellington school is beefing up its security after the attempted abduction of an 8-year-old child. The Ngaio school student was walking home just after 3 o'clock when an attempt was made to pull her into a vehicle. The child managed to wriggle free and run away. The man is described as Caucasian with a long white beard, bald and old-looking. Ngaio school principal Liz Miller says there will be a police presence around the school for the rest of the week. Staff will patrol the area. Wadestown, Cardinal McKeefrey and Otari primary schools have also warned parents to be on the lookout and be aware of a man fitting the description. Work on whether to explore a new location for Auckland's port is on hold until after October's election. The Auckland Council's Development Committee has decided by one vote not to do any further work for now on a report recommending a long-term shift to either the Manukau Harbour or Firth of Thames. The decision to leave it to the next mayor and council was opposed by Councillor Chris Darby, who says they should continue to act on an issue important to the city.
I don't think we stopped governing yesterday or today. I think we have a responsibility to continue in governance of this council on very large strategic issues which are of great importance to millions of Aucklanders.
Auckland Councillor Chris Darby. In sport, New Zealand's first Olympic diver in 24 years says she got to the Games 4 years ahead of schedule. The 18-year-old Aucklander Lizzie Q, who's based at the Louisiana State University, is the first New Zealand diver selected for the Olympics since 1992. Q says her goal has been Tokyo in 2020, so is over the moon to have qualified for Rio. The new Manchester United manager Jose Mourinho has announced his return to English football by reminding the world he's a proven winner who will tell his players to forget the club's 3 years of underachievement. Mourinho, who was out of work for 5 months after being sacked by Chelsea, indicated improving on last year's 5th place would not be sufficient, and he intends returning United to their former position of dominance. The BBC's Asifani reports from Old Trafford.
The special one has arrived. One of the most successful managers in the world has this week started his job as a manager of one of the world's most decorated clubs. And Jose Mourinho's ambition is clear.
I want everything. I want to win matches. I want to play well.
For Mourinho and for United, this marks a clean slate, and both will be hoping that it's the start of another successful era. The Portuguese must now begin the task of restoring United's reputation as he looks to rebuild his own.
Mourinho's first game in charge is against Borussia Dortmund on in 2 weeks' time. That's the news.
Uber's law unto itself.
Although our process is different to what the NZTA is running, in a number of ways it's actually a higher standard.
Globalise on Kai Tangata.
The kids can't even play out in the front yard unless I'm with them. So I think it's a place that they can grow up, be outside, enjoy the outdoors.
Secret recordings.
I mean, Teresa's just a bloody difficult woman, but you and I work for Margaret Thatcher.
The mics are live. Guy and Espiner and Susie Ferguson Morning Report, weekdays from 6. Then on 9 to noon, backers of the Healthy Star rating system on how they rate food products and why they're not solely focused on sugar. And after 10, Kiwi actress Danielle Cormack on finding success in Australia as prison drama Wentworth returns. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather to midnight tomorrow. Apopo, the northern half of the North Island, that's Taranaki and Taupo northwards. Rain developing north of Auckland overnight and spreading elsewhere tomorrow with strengthening northeasterly winds. Some heavy falls about Northland from afternoon and about Auckland, Coromandel and Western Bay of Plenty later. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, patchy drizzle developing tomorrow, then turning to rain at night. Whanganui and Taihape to Wellington, also Wairarapa, fine and cloudy periods, scattered rain north of Levin late tomorrow. Nelson, Bulla and Westland mainly fine, but rain in Nelson late tomorrow. Bulla, Marlborough and Canterbury. I keep on saying Bulla, I don't know why. Mostly cloudy tomorrow with patchy drizzle, especially in the east. Otago and Southland, cloudy periods with the odd shower. Fine tomorrow. Fiordland, rain clearing this evening. Fine tomorrow. And the Chatham Islands, a few showers tonight and tomorrow morning.
What's the weather in Bulla? What is the weather in Bulla?
I don't know. I'll have a look.
You say it and you don't even give the weather.
Westland, mainly fine, but rain and Nelson tonight, so mainly fine.
Go Bulla.
Okay. It's coming up to 9 minutes past 6, and this is Checkpoint, and here's John Campbell.
Thank you very much, Katrina Batten. The Labour and Green parties are launching an inquiry into homelessness after their attempts to get a select committee to hold one was blocked by National Party MPs. The Prime Minister John Key says his party doesn't support the inquiry because it already has a strong plan in place to deal with homelessness. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Bramwell.
Labour and the Greens say they pitched the idea of a select committee inquiry because they thought it was time to try to find some cross-party consensus on how homelessness could be ended. John Key was asked why National MPs on the Social Services Select Committee voted against an inquiry when they had previously told TVNZ they supported the idea.
The caucus had a discussion about the matter, and the reason why we didn't adopt the Select Committee taking that view was because we've already done a lot of work in that area. Paula Bennett did that well over a year ago.
Mr Key says he doesn't think there's any need for a summit on homelessness either.
I think what we need to do is implement the plan we've got, and if more resources are required, then we'll go away and have a look at that. But I'm not sure sitting around and having a summit on it would actually achieve anything.
During question time, Labour's housing spokesperson Phil Twyford asked the Social Housing Minister Paula Bennett about the government's plan.
Given the unprecedented surge in families living homeless on her watch, does she believe that her $10 million a year promise for emergency housing, which she had to admit will mostly fund existing places, is anything like enough?
Mrs Bennett replied that the government put in $2.5 million last year and an extra $41 million in the last budget.
We recently announced 14 providers, one of whom, which is the Salvation Army, which is getting $1.2 million, which will actually make a huge difference for them and the services that they can provide. The next tranche is currently out. We expect those to be in by the 13th of July.
Phil Twyford asked Paula Bennett why she did not support a select committee inquiry.
We have a range of initiatives, some which are already implemented, some that we are implementing, and some that are still in the negotiating stages, all of which will make a huge difference in the issues of homelessness and emergency housing, and that's what we want to concentrate on.
Mr Twyford gave it one last shot.
Did she instruct her caucus colleagues on the Social Services Committee to vote against the motion for an inquiry into homelessness, given that they had been supportive of an inquiry?
Mr Speaker.
I'll allow the Minister, but it's a pretty marginal question.
Mr Speaker, no, I don't instruct the caucus to do anything. They had a discussion and we came to it as a collective.
The Labour Greens inquiry will include hearings in a number of main centres and will also call for submissions from the public, experts and service providers. Ko Chris Bramwell tēnei, atu e te whare parimata mō Checkpoint.
Kia ora, Chris. It's 12 minutes past 6. The job of deciding if Auckland's port should move and where has been put on hold for a few months. If you have no idea where Auckland's port is, you just go to the bottom of Queen Street and turn right, basically. But the city's outgoing Mayor Len Brown has expressed regret for the first time that he didn't tackle the controversial issues sooner. Auckland councillors have decided to leave untouched until after October's election a study that recommended a long-term shift of the port. Our Auckland correspondent Todd Niall reports.
The possible expansion of the port out into the Waitemata Harbour has been one of the most hotly debated issues in Auckland. A report by a 17-member consensus group says Ports of Auckland will probably outgrow its downtown location, and the Manukau Harbour or the Firth of Thames should be considered as alternative sites. But that report has come before the Council's Development Committee just 3 months out from the local body elections. Councillor Callum Penrose says there are more pressing things to work on.
I would have thought that we've got bigger fish to fry at the moment, i.e. housing, transport and employment. And when the ports are going well, if it's not broke, don't fix at this stage. We're now debating this, and I think that's quite sad.
Councillor Chris Darby led calls for work to continue on exploring the future options in the last months of this term and insisted it was a pressing matter.
I don't think I can think of a topic that's come before this council where 1,000 boats have occupied the Waitemata Harbour and sailed and motored in rotation in protest, and 3,000 have gathered on the wharf, and then a second protest of around about 2,000. This is a very big topic for Aucklanders.
Councillor Mike Lee says it should be left to the city's new mayor and possibly a changed council lineup.
There is a healing process. It's not quite worked because actually there isn't really a consensus despite all the best efforts of Dr. Boven and his team. Ports have come out and said They still want to extend. Other people have said that is not, members of the consensus working group have said that's not the consensus we agreed to.
The consensus group's chair, Dr Rick Boven, says he thought there had been agreement on key findings. But he also told councillors that one of 3 Māori representatives, Karen Wilson, had withdrawn her support, citing insufficient weight given to a list of issues.
Mana whenua values, principles and other matters that are crucial, including the ownership of the Waitemata and the Manukau harbours, co-governance arrangements and the impact of impending settlement claims. And observed that there was insufficient consideration of cultural impacts until later in the study, and the impact was not sufficiently discussed.
Earlier in the day, another 7 members of the consensus group put out their own statement. It underlined there had been no agreement on any extension of Bledisloe Wharf, which the port company wants to push 40 metres further out into the harbour. At the height of protest over the port's expansion plans, the Mayor, Len Brown, came under fire for not moving sooner to get work done on the future needs of the port company. 3 months out from stepping down as Mayor, he reflected on that timing.
The one, if you can call it a regret, that I have in terms of our political decision-making during that point in time, it was the fact that it would have been good to have started this process of really bringing together the group that we did in the first term rather than the second.
Councillors voted 11 to 10 not to even do preparatory work on what the next stage of the port study might be prior to the elections. I Tamaki Makoro mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Todd Nile tēnei.
6:15 on Checkpoint. The family of a war veteran is making a last-ditch effort for compensation from the Defence Force for the asbestos-related cancer it says Philip Taylor Mehana contracted in Vietnam. Mr Taylor Mehana died last year after Veterans Affairs turned down his bid for a lump sum payment. He claimed the cancer was caused by the asbestos used to line ammunition bunkers at a base in Vietnam. Conan Young reports.
After the rejection from Veterans Affairs, Philip Taylor Mehana's family is continuing its fight for compensation with the Waitangi Tribunal. The tribunal is conducting a wide-ranging inquiry into the mistreatment of Māori servicemen and women, and today Marama Mehana presented her father-in-law's case. Outside the hearing, she told me the only way Mr Taylor Mehana could have inhaled asbestos was when he was ordered to demolish ammunition bunkers lined with the toxin as his battalion prepared to leave its base in Vietnam in 1971. She said her father-in-law died within a month of being diagnosed with asbestos-related cancer.
So as a family, we're still trying to comprehend and come to terms with how our father, this fit, strong man, could go down so quickly with this type of cancer.
Ms Mehana is clear about what she would like to see come out of the hearing.
My husband still serves in the army to this day, and as a wife and a mother, we have been around the army camps and it's been good for us. Just fairness, processes, anything to make it easier for other veterans and their whānau as well.
The lawyer representing the Mehanas, Charles Hirschfeld, said it should be easy for the Defence Force to establish whether asbestos was used to line the ammunition bunkers.
Once it's gone into, it shouldn't be a difficult exercise at all. I think the research will definitely show that it was a common material used at the time, particularly within the armed forces. That's already well known. It's just really pinpointing where these particular locations were.
Charles Hirschfeld said the Mehana claim will have wide-ranging implications for all veterans, Māori and Pākehā.
It's important so that others, therefore, might have a reasonable chance to investigate their own circumstances and bring that to the notice of this inquiry. So one would look forward to more information being available so that the collective effort supports all vets who are in the same situation.
Once its inquiry is complete, the Waitangi Tribunal is expected to make recommendations to the government on how to address any injustices committed against Māori in the services. A Defence Force spokesperson said it was unable to comment on the specifics of the case due to privacy concerns. In Ototahi for Checkpoint, ko Conan Young tēnei.
Thank you very much, Conan. We are going to talk sport now, and All Blacks coach Steve Hansen appears to be keen to stick around for another 3 years at least. Here to tell us about it is our sports reporter, Matt Chatterton. Matt, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, you was lovely to have you. So what can you tell us about this? So Steve Hansen, is anyone really surprised that he wants another crack at it?
No, well, I mean, obviously, he's been incredibly successful since he took over from Sir Graham Henry back in 2012. I think he's only had 3 losses as the All Blacks head coach since then, which is quite remarkable. But yeah, he is only contracted on until the end of next year, which would see him through the Lions tour, which is next year. But he came out on BBC Sport 5 Live this morning or overnight and said that he's interested in staying on to 2019 when the World Cup heads to Japan.
He is a fascinating fellow, isn't he? Because after Graham Henry, you thought, gosh, what can he do?
Yeah.
But he had Richie McCaw and Dan Carter and Martin Ono and Conrad Smith and Tony Woodcock, Kevin Maulam, all these fantastic All Blacks, and so you thought, okay, well, maybe it's the players, but those guys have gone.
Yeah.
And on the face of it, he looks to be...
Seems to be taking them to another level, that phrase has been thrown around a lot, I guess, in the last year. How do you take a team and, improve as they have? And with the new breed of All Blacks he's bringing through, that you can sort of see the sort of style of play that he's bringing to the game, the speed that the All Blacks play at is
he just
simply
likes it
phenomenal.
fast, doesn't he? Faster.
Indeed. So, yes, he believes sort of within the next month, him and... the NZRU will hopefully have reached an agreement as to him staying on till 2019, which is pretty exciting news.
Yeah, it is. Right, Let's talk tennis.
Tennis, yes.
Michael Venus.
Yes, Michael Venus is a New Zealand tennis player. He was playing at Wimbledon, the 3rd Grand Slam of the year in London. Unfortunately, he was beaten overnight.
He was playing doubles, right?
He was playing doubles with his partner, Croatia's Mate Pavic. They were playing the winners of the Australian Open men's doubles, which was Jamie Murray, Andy Murray's brother, who's still in the competition, and a fella from Brazil. And they were actually in quite a big game. It had to be called off overnight because they were down 2-0, and then they won the last 2 sets to square it back up. And then in the 3rd set, with the decider at Wimbledon, you have to win by 2 or more games in the set. And they actually got to 13-all and had to call off the match because it was too dark. So they came back the next day and ended up losing 16-14. So a bit of a marathon match. Yeah. Not quite to the extent of John Isner a few years ago when he played for 11 hours, but it was still a mammoth effort. And we actually have a bit of audio here of Venus. Here's what he had to say following the loss.
We've had a great start to the year. If anyone had said that at the beginning of the year, we would have taken that in a heartbeat. Yeah, and then being the 3rd round here and in a position to be in the quarterfinals, definitely tough right now, but I'm sure we'll look back in a couple of weeks and say, it was good, and just hopefully we can keep putting ourselves in these situations and try and come through in some of these other matches.
So Michael Venus there talking about his loss at Wimbledon. Venus has actually had 4 wins this season with his partner Mate Pavic in the doubles arena in the ATP circuit. So he's had quite a successful year, and he's about to head off to the Olympics to represent New Zealand along with Marcus Daniel at the Olympics. So that will be exciting. Just to preview, I guess, a couple of games overnight. The men's quarterfinals at Wimbledon play overnight. So we've got Roger Federer, the 3rd seed from Switzerland. He's playing Marin Cilic from Croatia. Then Andy Murray, I guess Great Britain's hopeful. He is playing Frenchman Jo-Wilfried Tsonga.
I see from your notes he's 2nd seed, is he?
Yeah. He was. Novak Djokovic was number 1 seed, but he got beaten by this man, American Sam Querrey, who is playing Canadian Milos Raonic. And then finally, Thomas Berdych is playing Lucas Pouille of France. So
okay, so that's the men's quarterfinals, and the women's quarterfinals are the next.
No, they've already played the quarterfinals.
The
semi-finals will be played on tomorrow evening or tomorrow night. Venus and Serena Williams are both in action, so not playing each other, but they could possibly meet in the final, which would be quite exciting to see. Finally, before we wrap up, 18-year-old Elizabeth Q will compete at the Olympics for New Zealand in the 3-metre springboard diving event. She's the first diver to represent New Zealand at the Olympics in 24 years, which is quite a remarkable feat. She told RNZ Sports editor Stephen Hewson that she's been on tenterhooks since qualifying at the Rio Test event in February.
After my trial event, I was just a waiting game. I knew that I would find out in June. So really, the months going up to it, I've just been treating it like I have been selected. So to find out that I actually was selected was absolutely amazing.
Because you beat the reigning Commonwealth Games champion at that event.
That was amazing. I couldn't believe it. I mean, I've been training consistently hard, and just Rio gave me that hunger to try get there, and just moving to the States and training hard every day, twice a day, has just helped my skills a lot.
Your hopes of getting to, when you're at Rio, what would be a good result for you?
I mean, I would love to make finals in my first Olympics. The goal has always been 2020, and to be able to go to 2016 as that stepping stone and that experience before the 2020 where I feel like I will be at my peak is just amazing. If I made finals, I would be over the moon.
The first New Zealand diver to represent New Zealand at the Olympics in 24 years. Let's go back to Uber, telling New Zealand drivers not to worry about the legal requirements for carrying paying passengers. It says that it has other ways to meet the same safety requirements as the Transport Agency endorsement. So what do drivers think about being told to break the law? Joanna McKenzie went for a drive with Ben Wilson, an Uber driver who also chairs the New Zealand Uber Driver Association.
Just set my phone up, as I always do, so that you can give the genuine Uber experience to the passengers of being able to put their own music on.
And so then in April, when Uber changed its rules, that you didn't need to have gone through a lot of that compliance, what did you think about that change?
I was shocked initially that would have happened, and I actually couldn't believe it at the time, so I had to check on the site, but sure enough there was an announcement that as of that moment the compliance drop had happened, but also the price drop, which was the real punch in the face for the drivers. I mean, worrying about other drivers being compliant is a sort of big picture thing, but worrying about, as of right now, I'm suddenly getting 20% less per ride. Wow, thanks for that. Thanks for the consultation.
When you hear the head of operations for Uber in New Zealand telling people that it's okay to continue if they haven't got this compliance, what have been your thoughts?
How on earth the management of Uber can be blatantly telling people that they can get out there and drive in a way that will be targeted by the enforcement officers, and they will receive fines, they will receive notices to stop driving, they could have their vehicle impounded.
And so what would you like the New Zealand government or the NZTA to do to try to resolve this situation?
I think the New Zealand government should directly tell Uber themselves that this non-compliant experiment that they're engaging in, I think that's what Uber themselves called it initially in Christchurch, and now it's an experiment that they're taking to the national level, has to stop. That they can't do that. This is a country of laws, and if they want their company to continue operating in New Zealand at all, they have to immediately reverse that particular part of it.
Yes, fascinating issue this. Just before we go tonight, the FBI has recommended the US presidential hopeful Hillary Clinton is not charged for using a private email account during her time as the Secretary of State. Obviously, that's a huge relief for her. But remarks from the FBI director that Mrs. Clinton had been extremely careless have been seized upon by Republicans. Here's Harry Horton.
Today was supposed to be all about the moment when Hillary Clinton teamed up with President Barack Obama to give her bid for the White House a boost. But for a few minutes on Tuesday morning, her entire campaign hung in the balance. After a year-long investigation into Clinton's use of a private email server when Secretary of State, FBI Director James Comey delivered the verdict.
Although we did not find clear evidence that Secretary Clinton or her colleagues intended to violate laws governing the handling of classified information, there is evidence that they were extremely careless in their handling of very sensitive, highly classified information. In looking back at our investigations into the mishandling or removal of classified information, we cannot find a case that would support bringing criminal charges on these facts.
Republicans were furious at the decision not to file charges, laying into both the FBI and Hillary Clinton. The investigation found more than 100 classified emails were sent and received via Clinton's personal account. At least 8 of those were determined top secret. Although her campaign team will breathe a sigh of relief, the FBI's criticism of Hillary Clinton's behaviour will no doubt come up time and time again during the election. Here's Julian Sanchez from the Cato Institute.
A big part of the appeal she obviously wants to try and milk is the idea that she has the experience to be commander-in-chief, that she's fit in a way that Donald Trump is not, by dint of her experience as Secretary of State and prior to that. And so to have that point of strength called into question this way, I think makes it difficult for her.
The Justice Department is likely to accept the findings of the FBI's investigation and recommendation not to bring charges. But the remarks made by the FBI director serve as a ready-made attack ad on Hillary Clinton. The accusation Republicans will make now is that she is unfit to be president. In an election featuring two deeply unpopular candidates, Americans now face a choice not of who they like the most, but of who they dislike the least. Harry Horton, Washington.
There's an excellent name, Harry Horton. And Harry Horton ends Checkpoint for tonight. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for listening. We'll be back tomorrow at 5.
RNZ